All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you are on the advisory council, we will do roll call through the chat feature. So if you can put your name in the chat, and then we can determine if we have a quorum. I think having 12 folks, we would have a quorum, and then we can move on from there. I'm going to turn it over to our co-chairs if they want to have any opening remarks, and then we can get right in to the recommendations.
Angie, do you want to go first? Good morning, everyone.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks again for taking time out of your day today for another meeting. Hopefully, we can get through the rest of the recommendations fairly quickly and, try to be kind to everyone else's time. With your comments, we want to hear everything. We want to hear what everyone says. So please be conscious of that. And, we did our best to give you a little bit of rundown, you know what I mean? So you wouldn't have to go through that large document. So I really hope that was helpful for you guys, just to kind of debrief you since we didn't have a lot of time. So we apologize for that, but I do hope it was helpful. We tried to keep that mindful for you guys. But other than that, thank you so much. Let's get this party started. Again, thank you for everything you guys do. And, let's try to make an impact where we can, and do the best we can with what we have. So I know there's some commonalities that we will get to. Thank you. Michael?
And you summarized it very well. I just have to wish everybody, stay safe as much as possible with the inclement weather passing through our area. I just hope you all stay well, your families stay well, because we need you because of your contributions to the state. So thank you all very much for joining, and over to you, Bradley.
Yeah, it looks like we do have a raised hand from Chris.
Hey, Brad, this is Chris Pilzer. My chat's not working on my feature here. It's a different computer than usual, but I am here. Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
So we have 13. I did see that Abby came on as well. So Abby, or Abigail, sorry. If you could just put your name in the chat. Again, if you are on the advisory council, if you can put your name in the chat, that's how we're going to be doing roll call today.
So Bradley, do we have a quorum to proceed?
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yes, we do.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to start with recommendation 5. This is where we left off. So I'm just going to talk through some of the changes that were made based on some feedback that we received. And these changes we sent out after our last meeting also. So we received the feedback before our last meeting. So there was a request to take out the definition of tertiary packaging. I should note 2 meetings ago, when we had our first meeting, there was at least the advice that we had received at that time was to, instead of taking out tertiary packaging, to define it instead. So we're just gonna have to make a decision on which way we want to go, because we do have some we do have 2 different approaches also on how to handle tertiary packaging. They also received another comment on here. Other states, instead of defining this as takeout and home delivery food service packaging, other states are defining this as food service ware. And then there was another one on this one right here. It didn't necessarily have to do with the reimbursing, like the collection at commercial. Peter, I think this was maybe your comment. What do you think that, can you just go over what you think this was supposed to mean based off of the conversation we had?
Yeah, and this might fit with the comments around tertiary packaging as well. So the question is, does this definition of packaging cover just residential materials, or does it also cover materials that are being supplied to industrial, commercial, and institutional entities, so non-residential entities? And so the question really is more about that. Does this include all packaging supplied to anybody, or does it just refer to that that's being supplied into homes
And yeah, and in our operational consideration meeting where we were talking about the model, it's not being supplied to, but in that model, we were going to increase the collection at commercial entities. So I guess does that, by definition, would that loop in if you're doing the collection at the commercial entities, anything that's supplied to the commercial entities, would that be looped in as well? But that's a question for the group.
Yeah, and I guess, Bradley, I wasn't sure if we had decided on that aspect or not.
Yeah. Scott has his hand up, Bradley.
Scott, you are muted too.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was just going to add a little bit to this discussion, and then one more point. Like Peter said, there can be tertiary packaging at residential, but a lot of tertiary is not residential. And so if the materials if the state largely wants a residential or residential consumer products that might be, purchased at commercial, but really taken away from home, right? So your to-go material is the same stuff that you're getting at home, and if it leaves the on-premise facility, it's a package in the waste stream that you want covered. Those are the things that you need to, if we're going to include food serviceware, for instance, that's away from home. But stuff that never hits the residential stream or never hits the public waste stream is often excluded. We came on a little bit earlier, and it wasn't officially part of the record, but Chaz's discussion with Peter about the cardboard boxes behind the retail establishments that never hit the commercial residential stream, is that kind of tertiary is often excluded. In our world, wine tasting rooms, I don't know how many wine tasting rooms we have in Maryland, but wine tasting room bottles that never hit the stream are often excluded. My other call out here is I remember us discussing at some point earlier in the year being tight on the medical product carve out. Fluoride, mouthwash, things that have minor amounts of medicinal uses as cosmetics. There's been some little efforts to get them exempt just because they actually touch the FDA. When I don't think that's it's not over-the-counter prescriptions. So,
yeah, and just so folks know, this definition is already in law right now. This was in the enrolled bill, so this isn't necessarily a proposal. It's just reminding folks that we already do have a definition. So the recommendations would be would be making changes to these, and then I'll go to the next hands.
William is the next hand.
Okay. I mean, you kind of, with this being a law, there's not much we could change. I was trying to think where
it's not a law.
I was trying to figure out like where we might have tertiary and residential, and the only place that I can think of where you might have it in volume might be, consumers that buy from Warehouse Club. To be honest with you, you'll have tertiary packaging being taken home by that, but other than that, it ends up behind the store.
Yeah, e-commerce as well.
E-commerce.
E-commerce goes through there too. So I think
a can in a case in a box.
Yes,
Amazon.
yeah, I agree.
Yes.
I agree. E-commerce or a Warehouse Club.
Yep. Good
Jazz,
point.
you had a comment?
Yeah, this is not in law if you're referring to the language in the third reader and the language in the bill that was introduced. That is not Maryland law unless there is some other aspect of law that has a definition of producer. And I think it might help. And the idea of food service ware, does that mean like knives and forks and spoons and whatnot? And, or does it mean plates or what? I mean, I understand what food service packaging is. I'm not sure what food service ware is. And it might just be good for somebody to define tertiary packaging so the whole group can have a consistent definition to discuss.
So this was the enrolled bill, so not the third reader. And we do have a definition of packaging materials in the enrolled bill. So this did make it to law.
Okay, then it would be good to have that particular definition and the site included in the recommendation.
And that's what this is right
Yeah,
here.
but it doesn't give the site. It doesn't say where it is in Maryland law.
Oh, you're saying the section, and okay, so it's 92501 E.
What law was this?
SB222.
Bradley, in the interest of time, though, why don't we, to Charles's point, let's just cite the law, and that if it's enshrined into a law, we cite it, and that will be what we use,
Yeah,
instead of.
that just makes it clear for everybody. That's all.
Yeah. No, I think I agree.
Yeah. So another question that came up: do packaging materials also include reuse and refillable packaging? That was a clarification that would need to be made. The question that I think is still: do we need to define tertiary packaging or take out tertiary packaging? And then, Peter, I know this was originally your comment. Is it? Are you good to address this through somewhere else, or do you think it's being, or are there other opportunities to address this?
Well, I think that it really is this scope of if we're defining the scope as packaging materials, are they supplied to all entities, or is it just residential entities? And obviously, when we talk about what's going to a residence and what's going to a commercial business, one generates a different amount and a different type of packaging. Packaging that goes to commercial can be much larger, in much larger volumes that are being dealt with on a regular basis, and often there are much different producers. And so one of the challenges as well is going to be, we're not talking about necessarily the same producers that would supply a household versus somebody that is supplying a commercial restaurant, a small tub of coleslaw versus a bucket of coleslaw. They're two different things, and they require different servicing.
But Peter, the question is, why wouldn't we include those?
Well, they require different collection systems, Michael. Many businesses will say, I already have a functional system, so I'm making, as Chaz mentioned, I think earlier, they're making money out of the back of there, so they don't necessarily want a pro to be involved in the collection of their materials. There's lots of reasons, as to why they would not want to be caught under this. It's different collection systems and processing systems.
Got it. Charles, if you would lower your hand since you've spoken, I think Abigail is
Well,
next.
actually, I've got just one other question, but Abigail, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our perspective, or the concern from the paper industry on tertiary packaging, I think, is similar to what's been raised elsewhere. But we produce packaging that touches consumers' hands directly, but also packaging that never goes into a community system. It is, and it sounds like maybe Chaz was talking about this before the meeting started. Sorry. county schools are open late today, so childcare had to come first. But the way that you know, the contracts that are set up between someone who is producing a product and it's going to a business or to a hospital or to a prison, that is happening completely outside of any sort of municipal system where there is a burden or a connection to the state at all. And so that having a fee that has to be processed through the PRO is creating a bunch of outside structure, bureaucracy, cost that is not something that needs to be a part of this. And so, you know, and also without a definition, does that include ties that go around, you know, logs that are being moved from point A to point B on their way to a sawmill? Does that include the wood pallets? There needs to be a clear definition of what it is and what it isn't. Wood pallets are not, you know, wood pallets are not made with the intention of it being recyclable. They're reusable, but the system kind of already exists. And so it's another of those, they're going to be paying a fee for something they are not in any way going to benefit from. And there's no clarity here to leave it out. And so if all of us aren't a part of the process at some point, they could get dragged in. And so that's why I think clear definitions, and maybe something like that already exists. Peter might know better than me in one of the other programs if there is a tertiary language, but yes, there is a decent amount of tertiary, but a lot of that is tied to contracts where, you know, there's already an opportunity for it to be handled well and is handled well by many industries. So that's kind of my piece on that.
Yeah. Who was next? Scott?
Before Scott, I thought Ellen raised her hand. I don't know if she's still before Scott.
No, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to reserve comment for a minute. I'd like to hear what Scott has to say. Thank you.
All right, Scott, please go on.
Oh, okay. Alan, I was happy to defer to you for, no, I think that a definition is needed. Some of the stuff that Abigail was mentioning are some of the things that I had been talking about as well. You know, I can see a big tub of coleslaw at a Costco or something like that being almost the same as what comes in the back of the house. So, but I understand the point. There are things that are clearly never meant for the residential stream that are purely commercial, and commercial industrial is a huge expanse. We're not talking about office build. I think we had this conversation on one of the prior, you know, advisory board calls. I don't think we're talking about office buildings and things like that. We're talking about the stuff that faces consumers that may end up in their home or in the public waste stream that we wanted covered. Not industrial complexes, not scrap metal, not the wrap around the logs for the sawmill and stuff like that. I think we did hash this out in a prior discussion.
Thanks, Scott.
All right.
Ellen is
Now
up next.
now just to follow up on that, Scott, just a comment. I think if you're putting aside the hospital analogy and correctional analogy, if you're adding cost to the county recyclable system, and I think it's something that we ought to be looking to have included. Otherwise, the people who are the producers are picking up the costs of a private sector, let's say business or whatever that sector is, that is adding to the cost of the recyclable system. I mean, the purpose is to have, a expanded, good, workable, funded recycling system. And I don't think there should be any free riders. And if it's a distinction that needs to be made between a nonprofit hospital, okay, as opposed to a Costco or BJ's, I think we ought to consider making that a distinction. That's just a comment that I wanted to make sure I flag and put on the table. If you're adding costs to the county recyclable system, and you are if you're a profit entity, and there's no reason why you should not be part of that funding equation. Thank you.
Chaz?
Yeah, the issue is tertiary packaging though, and looking up a quick definition, it's shipping containers and it's wooden pallets. I don't know if any of those, and Peter, you can definitely add to that. Since nobody has defined tertiary packaging, I'm not sure we really know what we're debating. But the question becomes, as Ellen raised, I don't think any of this stuff gets touched by taxpayers unless it's from smaller business establishments and maybe medical and other. I'm wondering if it's a level of complexity we need.
All right, Eileen, and then we can go from there.
So I just want to point out, I understand, Peter, what you were talking about, some of the materials that are generated by either industry or commercial, certain types of commercial businesses or organizations. But I would say also, for example, there are some jurisdictions that have mandates for recycling of materials, and they're the same types of materials in instances that are found in single family homes, in multifamily apartments and condos, as well as in the business community, right? There are, at, let's say, your jurisdiction like ours that has 35,000 businesses and organizations. Those businesses and organizations also do generate and have materials generated on site that are identical. They're the same as the ones found in homes. And so our mandates capture all of those materials and things. Granted, there are some additional materials that you wouldn't find in a single family or multifamily household necessarily, but I don't want this group to lose sight of the fact that in some jurisdictions, the commercial sector generates over half the waste, or about half the waste generated. So I agree there needs to be better, more specific definitions, but I also wanted to bring out these points because I think it is a big consideration that we should be addressing. And Scott, we did discuss it previously in one of our meetings, but I think we touched on it. I don't think we landed, as I recalled, with any kind of conclusions.
Does it make sense to say in tertiary as defined in regulation or something like that? Because there will be more time to think about this too.
Bradley, but when I looked at 222, I mean, looking at the place that you had highlighted earlier, I still don't think it's well defined. I think it dances around, but I didn't see that it was like actually defined.
No, it's not. It's not.
Right. So yeah. I mean, you can.
Martha?
Definitions need to be good to be helpful.
Yeah. And we can also add definitions in regulation too. Just throwing that out there that this isn't there. There's definitely more opportunities. Martha?
Yeah, I was going to say I agree completely with Eileen, and we're not just interested in recycling; we're interested in reducing, and we may not have a good picture of all that's happening in the commercial sector, and it is very important. I think what's problematic is if you exclude it and then we find out we've missed a major opportunity to do something. So I would err on the side of including it.
Isn't that where a needs assessment should help us?
The needs assessment is only about recycling. It's not about reducing. So.
But I mean the amount of tertiary packaging.
I hope so. I hope so. But I believe all packaging should be considered here, commercial, not just residential.
So maybe this is a substantial topic. I don't think we're going to be able to get through it. I think my point is, as these things get included, they do add a fair amount of complexity, sometimes for not a lot of benefit. So when we talk about OCC as an example, There's a lot of OCC that's getting recycled. And I think as Abigail spoke to, we may not be doing a lot to help in that situation. You've got other types of materials that are flowing quite naturally, and reporting may not add a lot of benefit. If we're calculating the number of milk cartons or milk crates that are being moved around the state, I don't know if that's providing a major benefit. But I think these are things that need to be considered. I think if our recommendation can just speak to the fact that this needs to get considered, because the pro needs clear definitions in what it's meant to capture, and to figure out how to address that.
Yeah, so I think one way we can handle this is there a motion to vote? There's two options here: delete tertiary or define it. So is there? I see Abigail has her hand up real quickly, because I know this was your comment, but we can move on through a vote.
Super quickly, gonna just throw it out there that in California, there is actually a threshold at which, for what is getting thrown into tertiary, ICI, industrial, commercial, institutional, there is a, if it's collected at a specific rate, it is no longer having to participate in the system. So if it is being collected at a high enough level and it's not contributing to the problem put forth by the legislation, then it does not need to be a part of the system. A thing like that exists, but I'm not suggesting that should be what we should vote on here.
Yeah. So I just saw that Vinny just jumped on as well. So I think we have 17 council members. Yeah, is there a motion to take a vote on, I guess, first removing tertiary packaging?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I think this is a little out of order. I think we have to define before we know what we're removing.
Yeah. So the second one.
I totally understand Abigail's concerns, but
yeah, we didn't get a second. I guess the next question is there a motion to define tertiary packaging?
I would move to define, but I don't know how to.
And how this reads: the advisory council recommends the following clarifications may be in law. We might not need to do it here, and it could be the legislator decides it could be defined in the plan or regulation. I mean, that's one way to handle it also, since we do have other recommendations to get to.
Bradley, I see Peter and Scott have raised their hands, so I don't know if they are.
I'm happy to move.
Okay. All right. So
I'm happy to second.
So defining tertiary packaging, we don't necessarily know where that definition is going to be. That would be, raise your hand right now if you vote yes.
Say again, yes on what?
To define tertiary packaging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have 16 out of 17. That passes. Or that will, the recommendation is that will be defined. All right. So we had, I added in where this was in the enrolled bill. So I'll take that out. I already talked about some of the other recommendations. So I guess the next motion is as written. Are we good to recommend this definition with these clarifications as a whole? Is there a motion to vote on this, or do we need some more? Do we need some more conversation on this definition?
Brad, I think the best thing might be to, just define that later. I think it's included so that we can get to the other things so we can move on to the next recommendation.
Okay. All right. Since we do have a lot to get through, I will move on to recommendation 6. So much like packaging material producer is already defined in 92501F. It's pretty, I'm going to put this on different pages just so it's a little bit easier to read. It's pretty extensive. We didn't get any comments on this one, except for there was a recommendation to use Minnesota's definition for producer. And then there was also a recommendation to take out some of the stuff that's on paper products, because it might not necessarily be relevant in this state, but just wanted to open up that conversation. I think the producer definition from Minnesota maybe came from Michael. Did you just want to comment on that real quick?
Are you, Scott, are you asking a question here?
Sorry, no, that was left over from the vote, sir.
So I guess the question is, so there was a recommendation to use Minnesota's definition instead of the definition that is already in law. Michael, I think that came from you. Did you have the reasoning on that?
Yeah, I think Peter, why don't you go first and then
Yeah. Okay. So there's a number of issues with the Maryland definition as it's set out. So the Maryland definition currently right now, if you scroll up, so it includes, it's set up like a hierarchy, which is helpful, but you've got conflicting potentially a producer. So the first entry, you say the brand or the manufacturer. So if there's a brand and a manufacturer, who's the responsible party? So you've got conflicts that are built in throughout each of those tiers. The other issue you've got is you'll often have a licensee that will be bringing a product into the state. So there may be a brand attached to it, but that brand has nothing to do with distributing that product or manufacturing that product into the state. And so the Minnesota definition addresses many of those types of issues in understanding contractual relationships and who should be responsible. And so the current definition as it is will be highly problematic and will create difficulties for the pro in implementing, and will create difficulties for the regulator in actually enforcing the law.
Okay, let's hear from Ellen.
Thank you. I agree. I agree with Peter's comments. I think we ought to use the Minnesota definition, not just for continuity, but just supporting Peter and in the importance of those comments. So thank you.
So let me also add in here. The reason I favor the Minnesota law, because it was well thought of, and that's some of the practices I've seen beyond the US. That's how to look at it. It's not because it's I'm sorry, the one we have here is not because it's problematic. What we're trying to do is to enhance something where we know it has been done well. So we don't need to reinvent anything when it's well done. That's why the how do you put it? The leaning to use the Minnesota law, if that makes sense. Okay.
Scott, and then I know Abigail provided some comments that we distributed to as well. So Scott first.
Yeah, I don't support everything in the Minnesota law, and some of it is not necessary for Maryland, but the producer definition is the one that got a lot of attention and is really as thoroughly vetted as any definition of producer I've seen in any of the state debates. So.
Abigail?
Sorry, unclick the hand, not the the mute. The SB222, which we have sought to tie our language to fairly closely, is limited to packaging, not paper products. And so if we decide to use the Minnesota language, that is why I think it needs to remain out. It is something that has not been included in the Maryland legislation, and that would be a very big add to the discussion.
And just the reference, this is where the reference for paper products. So it expands a little bit more than just packaging. I think that's Abigail's point.
Yeah.
So the recommendation.
Not applicable, I would say.
So Chaz?
Well, actually, two thoughts. First of all, I think the Minnesota, the arguments for the Minnesota law, with the exception of what Abigail raised, are a good example of how we might be able to learn from experience in other states, although it's worth noting that as of yet, no program has been implemented. So the experiential value is limited, but it does sound like a better approach. But I think Abigail makes a very strong point also on what we adopt specifically. So I'm curious about any responses to Abigail's point.
Peter?
Sorry, I just had just a couple of small points on the Minnesota one. One, and it probably speaks to the previous conversation as well. So it would be helpful if there's clarity. Is the pro responsible for the costs of materials that are put in, supplied into the marketplace for exempted producers or for exempted materials? So I don't think that that's the case, but it would be helpful for us to have clarity on that. On the hierarchy, there's two additional points I'd make. One is there may be a need for different hierarchies for service packaging and food serviceware. So that might be something we want to point out to the author. That is a conversation point that's had. And two, the one area that may be of concern in the hierarchy is the question of whether it's better to capture the U.S. importer or the distributor into the state. And from a compliance perspective, it may be easier from a compliance perspective to enforce over the person that's distributing into the state. That probably warrants some more discussion, but it might be helpful to point those two areas out.
So
you have Ellen next.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I think it's important to keep the Minnesota law language as best intact as possible, including, the issue of paper. I mean, that is where the other states are, and not to go down into a deep conversation. One of the important components of EPR is if you are part of the costs associated with recycling system, that you have to be in the system, a part of the system. And as a representative of an industry that prides itself in having strong recyclable materials that add benefit to a recycling system, paper does the exact same as well. And just an important component, I wanted to make sure that I just emphasize that a strong EPR system is costs. If you're part of the recycling system, you have to be part of the payer system. And we can talk about eco-modulation and whether there's credits and benefits there, which is a different subject. But I did want to flag that we'll be voting for the Minnesota system, but again, always open to refinement through regulation, as we move forward. Thank you.
All right, Scott.
Yes, thanks. On the paper question, when I'm referring to the producer definition in Minnesota, I'm not necessarily referring to the inclusion of paper. I think that's a separate discussion for us. Printed paper is really what we're talking about. And I think the question really is, if you want printed paper in the bin, then they're in the system. And if they're not going to be in the system, do they go in the bin? It's a substantial amount of the contamination that ends up in the glass stream, especially the shredded paper. And it doesn't perform the same as the fiber, cartons and cardboard. So I'm not necessarily pressing for printed paper. I think it's just a question of, if you're in the bin, you're in the system, and if you're not in the bin, then you're out. So.
All right, Abigail.
I mean, this is probably not going to surprise anyone, but we're not going to support a product being added to the list of materials outside of the legislation. We've been told in other instances that we are not here to dramatically change the instructions or the bill that we're building this on. We are the Packaging EPR Advisory Council. Printed paper has a incredibly high recycling rate, 100% recyclable. It has value in the market. And so there's no question of, if it's in the bin, it's going to be paid for because someone is going to buy it on the other end, which is something that is not necessarily the case for certain other packaging materials. And so adding it here because we're copy pasting language from a different state that has had this discussion in the legislature is making a really big concern, and perhaps we need to look much closer at the rest of the Minnesota producer language to make sure that all of those details are appropriate, instead of wholesale drawing it from another state where they've had separate conversations. This just creates a lot of concern for me.
Eileen.
I think that the other paper products, magazines, catalogs, all those things, I do think that they bear this group drilling down and looking more into it. And, maybe the needs assessment would be helpful in that regard. So, I'm not saying, and I agree, definitely we want to learn from the other jurisdictions, although, as I've said before, and Chaz alluded to, no one is out there that far ahead. However, this is existing language from Minnesota. But I do think that the other paper products are important for this group to consider. And I think, Abigail, what you're saying in terms of market value, that might be true now, but it's not a certainty, nor is it in perpetuity necessarily. So I just wanted to put those comments in front of the group as well.
Peter.
Bradley, I wasn't taking a side on whether paper should be in or not. I think I'm just simply saying, just clarity as to if producers are responsible for materials that are exempt or not included, or for producers that are not included.
So Bradley, with all these discussions, I think it's informative. Maybe we should just vote and see, we can make amendments once we finish, but I think this is maybe time to vote for this.
Yeah, so I guess the first vote is the first vote would be, do we want the legislator to consider Minnesota's definition or aspects of Minnesota's definition? Is there a motion for that? Looks like Peter raised his hand. Is there a second? Frankie? All right. So let me just put right here. So a vote yes is that the I'll just say GSA considers the Minnesota definition or aspects of the Minnesota definition. All right, so if you can raise your hand for this, then we can start to count. Sorry, my pen is having some trouble. So I count 11 right there. Oh, looks like 12. And that is, I do know that that's John from Republic. All right, so I have 12. If you don't want the legislator to consider the Minnesota definition or aspects of the Minnesota definition, please raise your hand. So I see one. And then if you are abstaining from voting, and again, we will, if you don't vote, we'll include as abstaining vote just based off the conversation last or earlier this week. If you can please raise your hand. So we have 17 total folks, so there's should be at least 4 abstaining votes.
Hey, Bradley, I think you might have missed mine. I was with the majority. This is Angie.
Oh, so you were 13? Sorry. All right. Okay. All right. Cool. Going on to recommendation 7, then. This has to, and I'll zoom in just a little bit so we don't get distracted by recommendation 8. Put it on a different page too. So a lot of this came from our conversation 2 meetings ago. I think that was January 9th. So as folks were talking, I was typing. Since then, we've received some recommendations to change those notes from that conversation on January 9th. So the first one, the recommendation in total has to do with data collection and reporting could take into account the following items. So based on the needs assessment, identify any data gaps needed to initiate development of a program plan. Was one of the changes, instead of saying data gaps are there and submit a plan to address. So I think it's just clear, making it a little bit more clear on what we were talking about. Change how much materials are being supplied into the collection to how much materials are being supplied into the state. That was a recommendation from CAA. The first one was from the Forest and Paper Association, and then this one, there was the note was audit and verification on what the pro is providing, financial performance auditing, and auditing on essentially a 5-year basis, and coordinating with updating plans. The recommendation was to change this financial and performance related audit and verification as a part of data collection and reporting. So I think it's just being a little bit more concise with that recommendation. Anything that we want to, so I'll open it up to discussion on data collection and reporting. Anything that we want to add, delete, clarify, all that good stuff. Peter, I think you were first.
I don't know if this is the right place to mention it, but the one concern I have, and I think it's laid out in the new legislation that's been released, is I'm a little bit concerned that the needs assessment is being run by the state. It's paid for by producers, and the pro doesn't really have the ability to be able to influence. And I think the concern is, if the needs assessment is meant to help the pro to improve the system, they really need an ability to make sure that the needs assessment is covering the key areas, the key information that they need to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. So I'm just a bit concerned as to who is driving the needs assessment and organizing it.
Yeah, and just a reference for some folks in Colorado, CAA did the needs assessment. In the state of Maryland, the legislator required the state to do the needs assessment. Martha?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out here that recommendation 9 is about program targets, but it also means that measurement would have to occur. And those items under recommendation 9 would be things that you would want to have: the quantity of packaging sold in the state by material type and recyclability, compostability, the quality of packaging waste in the state by material type, post-consumer recycled content of packaging by material type, the recycling rate for packaging sold in the state by material type, and the percentage of packaging sold in the state that is reusable by material type. Those are all things that should be monitored in the program. In fact, unfortunately, I'm not sure we're going to get all of this from the current needs assessment, but that's actually vital information you need. So I'm just suggesting that those be merged together, unless I missed something. Structurally, it just seems that should be collected.
So the recommendation is to take these items right here in 9 and add them to 7 because they are related to data collection and reporting.
Right.
Which seems reasonable. I would probably defer to the co-chairs on that.
But I would not want to put aside the idea of having targets on those things, but those are all things that we should be measuring. That's my point. That the recommendation 9 was about targeting, but we need to know that information to know if we're making progress.
Right.
So Bradley, let's hear from the rest of people. Ellen is next, and then we
just two things. On the needs assessment, I agree wholeheartedly with Peter with respect to the pro, and maybe there's a nuance here in which the pro can develop the needs assessment and in consultation with NDE or MDE, feedback, but not to sound, I would be concerned, and I'm just going to say it, on mission creep, Bradley, with respect to the needs assessment and other data that the MDE might be looking to collect. I just want to keep a really narrow, close, focused system on its mission and purpose. So I do agree that, the needs assessment should come under the purview of CAA. But again, I think there's a nuance here that can be made. Peter, I don't know your thoughts, but I do think there's a nuance here.
So maybe informed on the needs assessment instead of based on.
No, that the pro is the holder, developer of the needs assessment. Again, we have the advisory council, and you'll have the relationship with MDE.
I'll turn it to Eileen.
No, I wasn't so much thinking of an alternative when I raised my hand. I was thinking of a different point, which is I think the financial and performance related audit and verification, I think we do need to have a time frame in there. We've seen there's a recognition, for example, that there's a need for performance reporting from the pro to MDE on an annual basis. But I think there needs to similarly be that reflection in here of the basis timing wise of the audit and verification of this.
If it makes sense, that could be potentially just addressed within the program plan itself, as to the regularity of audit and verification, financial and performance, and that would be obviously reviewed by the advisory board and approved by MDE.
Yep.
You are on mute, Michael.
I said we want to hear from Scott before we get to the vote.
Oh, thanks, Michael. But if that conversation was still going on, I can wait.
I think rather than kicking the can down the road, that we should make a recommendation on timing for the audit and verification.
Okay. Scott, I still see your hands up. Are you?
Yeah, I do have a point on the needs assessment.
Okay.
I'm sympathetic to Peter's argument that they're paying for it. They need to have some control over what they're studying, but I think there was some deficiency in the Colorado definition law on this, and that the state should have some ability to inform the scope of things that are studied. And there should be, the public should see the results of the needs assessment. Not that Colorado's needs assessment was not disclosed. It's just that it didn't include everything that some people wanted in it.
So my question then, based on that, Scott, is to Peter. Would it be better to say in consultation with, the pro, so that we don't get mired on that? Because I think there are things that be fleshed out. I see value in having the state influence it, as well as having the pro take responsibility. What do you think, Peter?
Totally, I think that makes sense, and I think Scott's point is certainly a helpful one. At the end of the day, that the Colorado needs assessment was under a pretty tight timeline to get everything done, and so his comments may be more potentially about the timeline to get everything done. We certainly were challenged on that side to some degree.
That is 100% accurate, and it is. I'm not laying blame there. It was. I think I've discussed before that the most important part of the time element here is to give time after the needs assessment and in between the pro plan to have it fully vetted and sorted out. The compressed timeline did not help. But there were elements that could have been studied that fell short of.
So Scott, that's why we need the pro to continue the work, even after the legislation has been done. So Brad, could you add that in consultation so that we can get to a point where we vote? Peter, do you have any other comment? I thought we want to.
Yeah, I think Eileen's comment, like if we want to come to an agreement on what the timeline is, but I guess I'm just sort of, when we talk about financial and performance audits and verifications, there's some nuances to that. Like how deep are they? There's going to be some questions as to, obviously, if we're doing a large financial and performance audit and verification, then there's going to be, will delay us if it's going to be on an annual basis, because we'll only probably get information back from producers in March, and then all of that. And then we need to write the report, so it's got to be verified. So there are challenges, and again, I just haven't thought through all of those things. So that's why I was suggesting in the program plan, because it just provides some ability to have some of these discussions about what does it mean if we did this? How do we work through that? So,
no, I think Peter, that's a good point. There is a lag in the timing when it comes to collecting data and reporting on it. We got that. So, some of that can be done in consultation. That's why I want to use that word. So, if you're okay, that should be probably how to capture it for now, so we can think through it. I do reporting myself, and I see the lag. Sometimes it's very challenging. Completely agree. Charles, would you, do you have a point?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
I'm actually very sympathetic to what both Peter and Eileen have to say about the complexities of this issue and the timelines. I would just merely note, we were told to do our recommendations after the completion of the needs assessment. We have not yet seen a final needs assessment.
Yeah, and just to give some folks some timing on that. So my team has reviewed it. We're expecting comments back from our leadership, hopefully this Friday. And then we would need to get those back to our contractor to incorporate those. Just so folks know, we've already provided comments on the vast majority of like the technical memos that will be in the appendix. This is mostly comments on the main body of the report, which is not as detailed as the technical memos. I know folks are very eager to see the needs assessment. And then just some other context. I believe in Colorado, after the needs assessment was developed and while regulations and the plan were being developed, there was another round of surveys that went out to further help define that. And they, at that time, that they were doing meetings every other week as well, with their stakeholders also. So Eileen.
Thanks. So for the financial and performance related audit and verification, could we state that that those will be performed on a set periodic basis, and then some kind of language that says that that'll be, you know, determined as this advisory council continues its work, or something to that effect? Because I just don't want to leave. I don't think it should be left completely open, like, and unspecified.
I agree, Eileen, with that. And Brad, if you can capture it, that'd be very helpful too.
So I said, I should say these would be set on a periodic basis. Does that sound good?
And as determined by the committee.
Yeah, I think that will address Peter's concern, because I know what it means to collect data, and the lag that is associated with that makes it difficult. So I think that periodic basis we can define later.
Okay. All right. So in here, I just changed this: data collection and reporting would be defined in consultation with MDE and advisory council. All right. I think I captured everyone's input. Is there any other discussion, or are we ready to move to a vote on this?
Let's move, Brad.
Ready to move.
All right. So Peter, looks like you're motioning for a vote. Is there a second? There's a second. So vote for a yes for this recommendation as written. If you can raise your hand, and then we can do our count. All right, I count 13, 14, actually. Looks like there was 14. So folks can lower their hands. We'll do the no vote for this. If you can raise your hand. Going in between one or two. Chaz.
No, I voted yes.
Okay, all right. So
I didn't vote. I'll vote for this, but I'm disappointed that the things that I suggested aren't in the list.
And we will get to recommendation 9 also.
Right, but we still have to collect data on those things in order to get there.
So Sorry, was that 15 yeses then, Martha, then?
Yeah, I'll vote yes because there's some latitude here, but I do think if those things I talked about had been explicitly put in the needs assessment, we'd be in a lot better place right now, and they need to be monitored.
And then I have one, oh, and Ellen, you are a yes, so I guess that's 16 yeses then. Then if Ellen was a yes, then that should be 0 no's then. And then we have 17 members, so that would be 1 abstaining. All right. Moving on to recommendation 8. All righty. So for recommendation 8, a lot of this was notes from our meeting on January 9th, right here. We did get a recommendation from CAA to remove that the fee would be proportional on sales in the state and approved by MDE. So we can have some conversation on that. Peter, I think your point on the proportional on sales, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and maybe impartially on sales, but there may be more that goes into it, and that would be in the plan. Is that correct?
Correct. And I'm not sure why you'd want to lock it into the legislation. There may be lots of reasons to change the methodology for how producer fees are set. So typically they're in the program plan, and they're part of the consultation, and the changes to dues are consulted with producers on an annual basis.
So we already, in a previous recommendation, put that MDE would approve the plan, which means if the fee structure is in the plan, MDE is approving it. Did you mean to delete this part too?
Delete which part? Sorry, I can't see.
That the fee structure would be approved by MDE.
We can leave approved by MDE. I mean, it's going to be in the program plan, so it would be approved. Yes.
So I think that's already addressed in a previous one. So I'll just leave it deleted from here because it's MDE is already approving the plan. So, all right. Then there was from AFPA to include recyclability in one of the ways to lower fees. And then there were some comments on these last 2 bullets that had to do with molecular recycling, and could include a look back into steps taken over the past 10 years. So if there have been improvements that have been made for these items, and those investments have already been made, that producers could get credit for that. Michael, I think these ones were came from you. Did you have any clarification on those?
Sure. I think one of the things that is important is we know that technology evolves, innovation improves, and we want to make sure that we keep it open, because the pro is also going to be charged with looking at new technology. So this is something that is evolving. In the future, if molecular recycling becomes the best way to do things, we want to make sure we benefit from that. So I don't think it's in conflict with everything we're talking about. That's really about, making sure we don't stop from where we are today, that we look beyond today into the future and the evolving technology landscape.
And just to be clear on this, if it's going to energy and fuel production in the state of Maryland, we would not count that as recycling.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And our law already kind of accounts for that. But if it's going towards creating new polymers, we would count that. Our law would allow that. Scott.
Yeah, so look, I don't want to open a big debate about chemical recycling, molecular recycling, whatever. I mean, you largely addressed it already. We're not talking about waste to energy or waste to fuel. I am not opposed to other future modalities of recycling being covered. I think they need to be thoroughly vetted and addressed in the MDE, you know, whatever environmental judgment needs to be passed on that material. You know, it has to do it, but I don't want to bake in, you know, an automatic pass for molecular until it passes scrutiny going forward. 10 years is a long time for a look back. I don't mind. If you're going to have source reduction, okay, which I don't think we've gotten to yet, usually there's a look back or you set a target for when you start the assessment, right? But I don't know that we've, you know.
So Scott, your point is that whatever new technology we're going to adopt has to be vetted, and that's fair. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really not the thing.
There have been efforts in the past, Michael,
Yeah.
to from some groups to, you know, kind of automatically slide in, you know, chemical recycling as good,
Yeah.
you know, before it passes the test that it needs to pass. But I not opposed to progress and innovation at all. Just if it does involve new ways, it has to be tested.
Sure.
And quite honestly, if this is going to come up later when we talk about one pro versus off ramps versus what's the, you know, IPPs and things like that. I mean, this one area of recycling could suck up a lot of resources and a lot of time and attention for the pro and costs if the pro has to do a lot of work in this space. And if you allocate the fees by weight, which they shouldn't just be allocated by weight, then, you know, people that, you know, like paper and glass that weigh more are going to pay for, you know, activities that don't have anything to do with paper and glass.
Yeah. Chaz?
Molecular recycling, I'm a little surprised at the use of that term. The only company that I know of that uses the term molecular recycling is Eastman Chemical. And that is a technology that only uses PET. Which raises a good question. Shouldn't you use the term chemical recycling instead of molecular? Number two, you have to remember that right now, with all due respect to chemical recycling, it's press releases with very, very little reality behind it. The technologies are highly resin specific. There are very few, maybe two, operating in something close to a commercial scale. And it's a bit of a minefield politically. So while it's all nice to look to the future, I mean, if I could do that, I'd make my living in the stock market. I would just move to strike that point completely. I think it buys us nothing. I also don't know how it reduces waste.
So Charles, let me explain how it reduces waste. You know, and by the way, chemical recycling is same thing. So you can change to chemical recycling. They are the same thing. But you're right. Eastman Chemical has been on this journey for a while. Something like polystyrene, if you can break it down into its individual moieties and recombine it, that might make it even useful in the future. So I'm just using that as an example. So if you want to call it chemical recycling, that's great. But this is part of the innovation direction. When Eastman started this research in the 2000s, and I think I can tell you I was in there. The bottom line is it takes time for such technologies to evolve. So
I'm aware of that, but the Agilic started in around 2000. Actually, I think Agilic started in the late 90s and they went out of business a couple of weeks ago. Again, I think we're talking about something that we don't even know if it works, much less if it works to scale. And I just think it's a diversion.
So Chaz, if I heard you correctly, you made a motion to strike. So we could use this as an opportunity to vote. So is there is there a
Can we
second?
get all the comments in on this
Yeah.
first before we vote?
We can do that too. Yeah. Abigail?
Yeah, I think a lot of what I had intended to say was covered, but I think that a potential solution, instead of explicitly including something that is hotly debated in Maryland currently, would be to leave room for innovation by saying producers can pay lower fees by reducing the packaging and types of packaging they're putting in the market through eco-modulation, such as, so that it's a list of options where, you know, something could be added in the future. But I'm also not comfortable with explicitly including something like chemical recycling or other things like that that are going to be more controversial when most of the things on this list are not. So that would just be my thought there.
Yeah.
That's a good
Eileen?
build. That's a very good build.
Thanks. So I'm kind of thinking a different kind of way to maybe look at this. So the bullets for post-consumer content, reuse, reduced tonnage, i.e. waste reduction, compostability, recyclability. I mean, I think the premise of all those is innovation, maybe new technologies, you know, creativity, etc. I personally found it strange why we would specifically put on this list molecular recycling. I'm not sure we need to put any of those specifics in. I just feel as though a fundamental premise is that there's, you know, that this is going to drive that, you know, the creativity, the changes, the improvements, etc. So why specifically call out or create a list? I mean, we're never going to be able to include everything, and
Yeah.
there are always changes in technology, always improvements, every, you know, all the time. So we would never be able to capture all of it anyway, and frankly, we would be memorializing something that's going to continue to organically grow and change.
Yeah.
So
Eileen, I agree. So in the interest of time, I think
Yeah.
Abigail built on that innovation. I think innovation can capture all of that. This was just one example, but if we put innovation bucket, I think that addresses it.
well, and I don't think it's just innovation in recycling technologies. You know, maybe it's just innovation, you know,
Yeah.
broadly, do you
Yeah.
know? And innovation, creativity, improvements broadly.
I agree. So Brad, you want to listen to the others too?
Yeah, we can do that. Peter?
Sorry. So my issue is, how does this get implemented? So if the pro needs to go back 10 years to look at steps the company has taken 10 years ago, I have no idea how we would enforce lowering fees for a company that may have made a design change 9.5 years ago versus 11 years ago. Like the administrative complexity you're adding onto the pro is going to be huge. The other question is, for the conversation that's been had, I mean, typically the costs of managing the material are based on the technologies that are being used and what those costs are. So I don't know how we would apply innovations like recycling innovations into the cost, other than if it's cheaper to manage that material. So I just struggle with how the pro implements innovation, creativity, and improvements. The pro is always going to assess the cost of the system and the cost to manage those materials in the system. So yeah, I just don't know how to do it. And the one last thing I'll mention is reuse. So there's this question: if refillable and reusable materials are in, they'll pay a fee. They can pay a reduced fee because obviously they're going to circulate multiple times through the system. If they're not included in the system, then we don't want to be provided lowering their fees because they're not actually they're not actually paying into the system. So just something to consider as we go forward. Sorry.
So Peter, I heard you that it would raise the administrative complexity, which would also raise costs too. So if there was a reduction in the fees because of the innovation, but if it's complex to track, then that would also just re-raise them.
I guess the question is, if we have to adjust fees based on a producer that has reduced their packaging over the last 10 years, then the pro needs the ability to be able to audit that producer. And going back 10 years in data is going to be a nightmare.
Okay. Angie?
Yeah, real quick. I know I like how, leaving room for innovation, creativity, improvements is in there. But I do want to say, if some people are stuck on putting chemical recycling in there, is there a way to put language of chemical recycling can be used when all other waste diversion or recycling methods have been, can't be used? I'm not really good with the language part, but something of that nature, meaning, you know what I mean? Like it can't go to any of the other waste of it. It can't be reused. It can't be compostable. It can't go through the recycling stream as is. Because I feel like there may be a place for it in the world. You know what I mean? However, when all else, other options have failed, viable options have failed. So I just want to put it out there if people are kind of stuck on that, if maybe that language would help. I don't know. So
I agree, Angie. So maybe the innovation captures it, and we've seen innovation in other parts of the world. So Peter, to address your point, I think if we can capture it under innovation, that the pro, and remember, the pro in this case will be agnostic of whoever, whether it's the current pro or whoever, but innovation being in there is the key.
Where is innovation going? We've lost the thread on this.
So
That's
initially, as I do want to get to Martha, but we can follow up on that. Martha?
Okay, so the issue here from the get-go was that this is a subset. These are bullets that are defining whether they pay lower fees or higher fees. And the word recyclability, the criteria for recyclability was not there. What was there was some effort to get molecular recycling and chemical recycling into the fray. What we need is to take this out. It's just inappropriate here. It doesn't even have to do with innovation. What we need is the definition of recyclability. We know what post-consumer recycled content, reuse, and retonnage and all that is. And we have one at the very end. It's not numbered as a recommendation. It's just at the very end. Recycle or recycling means the process of collecting, sorting, cleansing, treating. You guys can go to the end if you want to see it. And it says recycling does not include landfilling, combustion, incineration, energy generation, fuel production, or other forms of disposal. And so, here we just need to know whether it's more recyclable or not by what means it's recyclable, but you have a definition at the end, recyclability. And that was from California law, so it's consistent. So, and the responsible end market. So that's why I just think that talking about the process by which it becomes recycled isn't really appropriate here for setting the fees for the producers. It's like trying to insert a definition of recycling in here in a list of criteria where I don't know if I've been clear about that, but I don't know about looking back 10 years, but it just doesn't belong. No matter what you think about chemical recycling, it's just not appropriate here to adjust the fees based on the kind of recycling that they do.
So if, for example, if chemical recycling and you're creating new polymers makes more post-recycled content, you're saying that it's more about the post-recycled content, not necessarily the technology.
Right, but I mean, if you can scroll to the end where that definition of recyclability is, that actually eliminates burning. It eliminates a lot of things that people are concerned about, and I think that solves this problem.
And we are trying to go through these in order, but I understand.
Well, there's no recommendation attached to that. It's just kind of hanging in limbo at the end. So I just wanted to point it out.
I do have it in the agenda, and we're still going to talk and vote on that also. So,
thank you.
Can we hear from Scott, and then we'll move on?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I was supporting Peter's points on the 10 years and the data and the look back. Again, I really think, again, if we're gonna get into source reduction, you have to have a base year to analyze against. But 10 year, I mean, a lot's happened in 10 years. A lot's happened in 5 years. The system is very different after post-pandemic than it was pre-pandemic, even. So I think you need to tighten that up. And I also agree with most of the comments on, like, I can support the idea of leaving room for innovation and improvements, but what happens? This program is about largely, it's about many things, and it can be about many things, but it's not necessarily about what happens to the material or how the material is prepared after it is delivered to its end markets, right? So you know,
Scott, you're okay with the innovation language, leaving it there?
I'm okay with the innovation language,
I think
but
we've
I don't.
said remove the chemical. Charles, if you don't mind, we'll remove both the chemical or molecular, whatever it is, and leave the innovation there so that we can move on.
I've never heard of a politician who voted against innovation.
Thank you.
And then I guess there was another question. Do we take out the 10 years also?
I would need Peter to make a comment on that, Peter, and then we need to get to vote, okay?
Yeah, I mean, my preference it should be removed.
Okay.
Come back in the program plan. I mean, I'm fine to leave the innovation, but it does make it more difficult when the language is very broad and the pro needs to implement. So that's the only comment I'll make, but I'm happy to support it as is.
So this recommendation is a two-parter, so I'm actually going to do our votes. I'm going to ask the council if we want to do our votes in two parts, because what the fee structure could be is different than what the fee goes towards. So is there a motion to vote just on this first part right here? Is there a second? All right. So a vote, yes, for the producer fee structure as written.
Okay, without the stricken through lines, correct?
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
that's, yeah. I would count that as written. All right, so if folks can raise their hand for a yes. So I see 14 yeses. For a no on this, if people can lower their hands. And then re-raise them if you are a no on this fee structure as written. So I see one no vote. We have 17, so that means that there would be 2 abstaining. All right. Okay. All right, moving on to the next one. So this is talking about once the fee is collected, where does it go? And what costs are being paid for with the fee? So we have the pro cost, including admin costs and the cost of implementing the plan, audited by a third party. Reimbursing entities for recycling reuse costs associated with collection, sorting, processing, and education. And I think this wasn't supposed to be education of covered materials. It was just education. Education costs could include expenses associated with communicating to producers, consumers, haulers, processors, and information about reuse. Reimbursing MDE essentially for our oversight of the program, and then reimbursing MDE for the cost of current and future needs assessments. Any questions on those and starting up conversation? Martha?
That was,
I don't know.
that was an ancient hand. I forgot to take it down. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Eileen?
Thanks. I just want to make sure reimbursing entities on the second bullet, entities includes local government.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think I think it was also, it could be private entities, especially if there's a private hauler or something like that.
Right. Thank you.
Peter has raised his hand, Bradley.
Peter?
Yeah, so just a couple of questions or comments. What in this, so reimbursing entity for reuse costs, I guess I'm trying to understand what would be a reuse cost that the pro would be paying for. Typically, those are deposit-like types of systems that operate. So I wasn't sure as to what that was referring to. And then the next bullet on, education costs could include expenses associated with communicating with producers. Typically, the pro is the only entity that communicates with the producers. Is there somebody else you were thinking would be communicating with producers? And then the final point just fits to the earlier comments we've had about reimbursing MDE for the cost of current and future needs assessments. Is that going to be, I think, my preference would be that the pro is leading that and paying for the cost, not simply reimbursing MDE for their study.
Yeah. So for about the reuse, it would be costs associated with collection, sorting, and processing and education. On the education side, and this came from our discussion on paying for education in our operational consideration meeting that we had with Eunomia. There was a comment out there, and I forget who made the comment, that we just didn't want to educate the consumers. Really, you have to educate everyone in the who's involved in the collection, sorting, and processing of recyclable materials as well. And then this one in this just goes back to what was in some of the previous versions of the legislation, is that the cost of the needs assessment was paid for by the producers too. So if it's something that this council does not want to recommend, then reimbursing our costs for the needs assessment, then we can vote on it and strike it.
And to reiterate what Bradley just said, so for example, there are jurisdictions that have very robust education and outreach efforts where it's outreach and education, not just to the generators, it's to every player that's involved, to make sure that everyone is on the same page and is running down the football field in the same direction with, the same information, from a credible source. So I just want to reiterate that.
And this should be recycling and reuse right here. That's actually a typo.
So I think the pro is okay to provide education. I guess my concern is, are we now paying a company that provides water bottle, office water towers? Are we providing reimbursements to them now for collecting those jugs and processing them, rewashing them so that they can be used again? Or would that apply to propane cylinders that are potentially, or oxygen cylinders? Like, I guess I'm just worried about what is caught in those reuse costs that we're putting in there, because it's something new that I haven't seen in any other jurisdiction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Scott?
I think my comment is somewhat related to what Peter was just raising. It's not just about the reuse and the education, to what Eileen was saying. Typically in other states, the fees and what gets reimbursed is also tied to the amount of local control that is included in the program. Is each county making its own decisions about the service provision and stuff like that? Or is there a standard level of performance? We did touch on this in a previous, I guess I'm going through the memory banks today, a previous dialogue about some counties that don't want anything. And does the state have to come in and provide does the pro have to come in and provide any recycling in that county if Ocean County doesn't want any, like is going to stop recycling trucks with armed guards at the border, that kind of thing. There is a limit. Usually in some other bills that I've seen written, there's a standard base. If the local government wants more things that are added to the recycling ability than what's on the standard state plan, then that's not that's on the county and not on the pro and the producers, that kind of thing. So there are some, limits. And I think what Peter was raising about refillable propane tanks and stuff like that. I mean, those things are, reuse has a wide variety of meaning for a lot of different people in different packaging sectors. So I think there's some boundaries issues. I think largely addresses it. So, but we may need to get to the other part in order to tie these two things together.
Bradley, you have Charles, and then
just a very short comment. I think Peter sort of inadvertently hit upon a very important point. The PRO is not a sugar daddy. It's not an ATM. The goal of the PRO is to pay as little as possible to keep its costs down and to keep its members' costs down. And we have to remember that in our discussions.
Very well said, Charles. Let me add my 2 cents here, at least from what I've seen in other countries. The PRO is really the one that is responsible for the what I call consumer education. And the reason is the people that pay into the PRO want to see that happen, but they don't want to have their cost balloon. So it cannot be carte blanche. So I think, Charles, you make a very good point. And I think, Brad, rather than spend time, you've heard from Peter. Some of us think that makes sense. Maybe we should go to a vote at this point. Charles, you have your hands up. Do you mean?
No, just to back up, just remember in Maryland, we have very different ways of collecting, something we'll probably be discussing in a couple of minutes later. And there may be a need in Maryland for some different forms of education because of the investments that have already been made by local governments on their programs. It's just is what it is.
Hey, that's Bradley. Don't impose it on the pro is what I'm saying. That one can continue,
Well, hey, PR's gonna have to pay. They're not gonna free ride in Montgomery County on education.
Yeah.
John, I think you had your,
You had a comment that Eileen mentioned about including local government, but I think you were also going to put into the private sector as well. I think entities covers it all, but since you're listing local governments, we probably should put in the private sector.
that is involved in reimbursable activities.
Excellent. Peter?
I'm fine to add that. It just, you may get not-for-profits that might be involved as well, but it's fine as it's written. I guess, yeah, I was going to suggest, I would propose a couple of changes based on my comments earlier. I would propose removing in the second bullet and reuse costs. We cover reuse in the education piece, which I think no, in the first sentence, and reuse costs. And then I would recommend we remove producers from the list of communication because the pro will provide that. And from the last one, I would just remove reimbursing MDE for the, and just keep it as costs for the current and future needs assessment.
So the first one in reuse costs right here, you are also saying take out producers right here, and then reimbursing the cost.
Yeah, you can say reimbursing for the cost, just take out MDE. That can be decided at a later point, I guess, but
yeah. And just so if MDE, well, I'll go to Eileen on that.
Thanks, Bradley. So looking at the reuse cost in the second bullet, so let's say there's, let's say refillable containers become much more prevalent. And let's say that at that point that, for example, a jurisdiction like Montgomery County, our program started in the 1970s, and we've continuously grown and expanded ever since. So let's say that there is a system by which those refillables are collected, sorted, prepared for refilling. Peter, I think personally, I think reuse costs should remain, because I do foresee a time when, again, innovation, takes hold, and we start to do that more and more.
I think my concern is you're forcing then the pro into potentially, because we've got commercial materials in. Are we paying for wood skids that are already being managed? Like typically the issue with reuse materials is the upfront capital to purchase the item, and then the cleaning system or whatever other systems that might need to be in place for them. They've got a value in them. They're typically returned and collected. That's usually not the issue. But my concern is this really puts a specific requirement on the pro that I think is going to be problematic.
Bradley, Scott has his hand up. Scott, can you make it brief so we can get to the other two as well?
I can, and I'm really trying not to use the word that's going to set some people off here. So I'm going to try to avoid it. Eileen, I think your point there on the future stuff and on the reuse is this is a perfect kind of example of a future thing that may require an off ramp from the one system. And I'll try to refrain from causing others' heads to explode by using the specific word that needs to be it, but there are situations here that may help the overall performance of Maryland that can't just be managed by the one PRO and should be managed by a separate system. And maybe, someone else is going to use the word that makes others' heads explode here, as I've been told not to even bring the subject up in these discussions. So
that's a collegial way of saying it. I love it.
But I do as best I could, Mr. Chairman.
That's good. Bradley, I think we got to vote on this because we have two more we want to get to.
Frankie is on the council.
Just one short administrative change. I think we need the word cost, though, for recycling costs associated, right? And just deleting and use. I think that's what Peter wanted. Otherwise, I think we don't need for recycling associated with collection, sorting, and processing.
Thanks, Frankie.
All right.
Okay. All right. So is there a motion to vote? Is there a second? You didn't see a second. All right, Scott. So
let's have a vote. Let's see how this goes.
So a vote yes, the fees would pay for these items. All right, so if folks can raise their hands. I should say activities. So I do see 9 yes, since we do have 17 people in the room. That does get us over. We're going to go to the no votes. So if you can lower your hands, if you're voting no on this, please raise your hand. So I saw 4, now it's 2, now it's 1. Sorry, and now 0. So do we have 0 people voting for this?
Oh, no, I'm
Sorry. Yeah, just one. I saw at most 4, but I don't know if folks were choosing to abstain. So
I'm choosing to abstain now.
okay. So please raise your hand for a no vote. Sorry about that. So I see 2 no votes, and then if that means we would have 5 people who are abstaining. Actually, it's 6. It's 6 since we have 17. All right. Okay. Now we're going to go on to recommendation 9. So let's put this on a different page. So program targets to measure success could include these items right here. The quantity of packaging sold in the state by material type, recyclability and compostability, the quantity of packaging waste in the state, packaging consumers, recycling content of packaging by material. I won't read the rest of these. I'll add the one that was new. Effectiveness of infrastructure could be measured in material yield, contamination rates. Peter, I think you had a comment on these 2, that these aren't necessarily targets, but are things that should be measured. Like you're not going to have a goal for the quantity of packaging waste. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's just it. It's not, they're not targets. Yeah. So we just need to adjust the top line that says
targets / measurements.
Yeah.
And then this addition was from CAA as well. I forget your comment on the percentage of packaging. Oh wait, difficult to measure if not reported to CAA was the question about.
Yeah, so if in order to measure reuse, they need to be designated. But again, the question is, does it matter by material? Are we trying to count reuse, or does it matter if it's glass, metal, plastic? Like, I don't know. We're just adding more requirements. So there's always that question of administrative burden, which you'll be adding to those companies. Some of them which, have highly functioning systems, pressurized cylinders, highly functional, water jugs for highly functional systems. So we're just capturing information for activities that are already happening.
Yeah. So Martha, I think these targets came from you. Did you have a reasoning for by material type for this particular one? And you have your hand up raised anyways.
Right, I do. Which one are you talking about? I'm trying to go back to the first bullet where the origins of this bill were about reducing the amount of plastic packaging. Okay, so I hope that doesn't get dropped. It doesn't have to be necessarily an objective for all materials, but we should leave it open for reduce packaging that we find harmful to the environment. And these are like such standard things for measuring packaging. And this is supposed to be about all packaging. I don't understand why it's difficult to say, you know, not to mention the material type. If you're counting it, why not? Then we can know, yeah, okay, most of the reuse is coming from the glass. That's great. That's great. Let's keep going with that. But we need to know the situation with packaging in the state, and these are like basic parameters. I don't understand why this is difficult.
So just if I could respond, so I don't think we were talking about packaging, all types of packaging around by material type. I think the question is, largely there is no jurisdiction right now currently collecting data on reusable items. We had a program in Ontario that was collecting data around cylinders, and they have stopped collecting the data just because it is quite difficult for them to actually report on those materials. So reuse is difficult. It is difficult to measure, and it's new. I guess I was simply saying by material adds more requirements on those entities.
It's not necessarily a target, like he was saying. We can measure. It could be a target, but we could also measure it anyway, because I think we want to get to reusable and not single use in the world, right? I mean,
yeah,
why should we track it?
Peter, let me ask a clarifying question. You are not saying to remove the percentage of packaging sold in the state that is reusable. You are not against that, are you?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying as you add by material type, you're asking for more data from those companies.
Got it. So
why is that a burden? Why is there a burden? Yeah.
Martha, let me ask you too a clarifying question. If you are talking about percentage of packaging sold in the state that is reusable, doesn't that capture everything, even things we don't know today?
Yes.
I mean, so taking out the material type is not going to hurt this particular requirement.
It's not going to what?
It's not going to hurt this material.
No. I mean, whatever materials are out there.
So that's what Peter is saying. He wants to take out the by material type. Just leave it there so that it'll be easier to track. Is what he's trying to say.
Yeah,
I just don't see any additional burden to mentioning what kind of material your reusable item is. That's I don't understand the objection, but I'm a little bit worried here because we're getting toward the end, and I just want to mention, Bradley, that you made a list of recommendations here, but there were a lot of them that were missing from slide 19 of your January 9th presentation, and they're not on this list. The adopting the language from Minnesota bill that if there's a separate bottle bill and EPR packaging programs, the two must be harmonized. That's not on this list. That MDE was also proposed would set enforceable targets in rulemaking on recyclability, PCR content reduction in plastic packaging, and a requirement in statute that all packaging be recycled, compostable, or reusable by a date certain. So those weren't on this list, and I have to leave exactly in 4 minutes to get to Annapolis. So I just want to make sure those things don't drop off the table here just because we're out of time. When we go to the last recommendation, we say it's all over. And we have those definitions at the end as well. So can these be taken up on the 13th when we meet?
So are you saying we should vote before you leave on this one so that we can get you at least as much as possible?
Sure, we can vote on recognition. I'm just worried that the things that you might rush through 10 while I'm away, and then we will never get to the things that were missed on the list from his slide 19.
Yeah.
I want to make sure those get voted on at some point.
Yeah.
But it may not be today. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, our work continues, but we need to get to this. I agree. But Brad, I think what I'm hearing is I don't think there is a major thing lost when we say percentage of packaging sold in the state that is reusable. So we can get to the vote.
Okay. All right. So is there a motion to vote?
One quick question. Effectiveness of infrastructure measured in terms of material yield and contamination rates. Contamination rates I find particularly bothersome because the infrastructure deals with what people put in their bins. And that's the contamination. And I'm not sure how that applies here. That's all. Just I'm a little also how material yield would be measured.
So some things that we've discussed in our modeling exercise with Eunomia, if you see more investment in education, hopefully contamination will go down. So the relation between those could be a way to measure that.
But that's just education. And
but it's return on investment.
That's theory. It's not reality necessarily. It's more subtle than that. It's more than just education when it comes to contamination.
No, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm Scott. Yes, it's the weather, it's collection efficiency, it's a whole bunch of very practical, real world recycling realities.
Chaz, it also has to do with the operations of the MRF. Are they running the belts faster than designed? Do they have the right equipment? The contamination affects the commodity value, for all commodities and especially ours. If you try to sell a truckload of glass that's only half glass, that affects the commodity, the value that you get back for it, as whether it's 80% glass or 90% glass. So it's not just what people put into the system. Contamination is a key performance indicator of the efficiency and the improvement of the system.
Hey, Bradley, I want to get to the vote before
some of it's about the consumer.
Well, Chris, who actually runs a MRF, would have a comment, perhaps. Who actually runs a MRF?
Well,
Chad, you're right. I mean, we have the most. We have the most up-to-date equipment at our new site, and it runs very efficiently. And we are seeing residue numbers come down greatly. However, Scott, what people are putting in their curbside bins and in their commercial bins does affect it as well. So it is a big piece of it.
I totally understand that wish cycling has something to do with it. And I appreciate very much all the investments that y'all have made at the one site, but not every MRF is like that. And I don't think you're arguing that contamination in the bales or in the piles doesn't affect the commodity value or anything like that. And it varies from state. I mean, we showed our own analysis shows that for our material alone, the variance from one source to another source can be 25 to 50% contamination. So it is, it's not just all down.
Hey, Scott, let me just get my 2 cents in, because you've got a lot in. I respectfully disagree.
Okay.
So we are unfortunately out of time. We still have.
So can we vote on this, my friend, before we
wait a minute,
wrap up?
Michael, it's really disrespectful. I mean, some of us have raised our hands, and y'all are pushing us way. I mean, this is unreasonable at this point.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead and make your comment. I thought, I want to make sure everybody speaks, but at the same time, we can't have the same people speak all the time.
Yeah. But you have to give us the opportunity. I mean, otherwise this is really a BS game. First and foremost, the first 2 bullets, I think that those can be good measurements. I think that in terms of looking at that information and data, we can see waste reduction over time. I think that it's very reasonable to want the data and information by material type. Everything that we have to report in Maryland is broken out by material type. And not just that's per the MRA, that's per, that's both for our MRA recycling rate, but it's also for, other initiatives and moving forward for reuse. That'll be important. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable thing to ask, honestly. It also gives us clues as to progress and specific materials that we need to focus on and target moving forward in our efforts. Thank you.
Brad, if it's you to just mention, I'm totally okay with if you want to leave by material. We've specifically provided an exemption in the act for propane, exchange, and I assume that their worry is administrative burden. So I was just trying to reduce the burden on that side, but I'm fine if it wants to stay the same.
So Bradley, can you undo your deletion then?
For by material type then?
Right, that it stays
All right.
in by material type.
Thanks, Ellen.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that I did not do what I wanted. Let me just retype it.
Excellent.
Something, yeah. For these recommendations, something that I've also seen in other groups is doing an email vote also. That might be something else that we want to take a look at too. But I know we've lost some members, so I don't necessarily know if we have a quorum. So if you are on the council, can you at least raise your hand to see if we have 12 people online?
My screen's going, not helping there.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a quorum. So we might have to discuss if we want to continue this conversation or do an email vote.
How many people do you have?
I saw at most 10 on there.
Isn't that a quorum for this?
I think it's, since we have 21
Quorum's
members,
11.
it would be 11, I guess.
I think it would be inappropriate for us to try to
Okay.
hold a vote when so many folks that were with us had to
Yeah.
drop off because we've exceeded the posted time.
Absolutely.
I'm really reluctant to do email votes because it's kind of hard to discuss these issues by email.
I agree. And in recommendation 10, that last bullet, curbside collection method, single versus dual stream, I would like us to have a discussion. I'm not sure what that means, but I would like us to have a discussion before taking any kind of even thinking about an action.
So Brad, is the vote to continue to next time? Is that what you said?
Yeah, we also don't have a quorum
yeah.
to vote for that.
Yeah.
Too. So
All right.
I think we just need to have some discussions on what we're going to do next. We have run out of time. I do want to open this up to public comment. Are there any public comments?
So Brad,
All
our
right.
next meeting, let's talk about our next meeting then. That's next week, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So, and you hear the sentiment, people want to discuss this, which
That is
right?
on the 13th. That would be plenty of time.
Yeah.
To discuss
So-
the 2 recommendations and then the 3 definitions.
Yeah. So we discussed 9, recommendation 9 and 10. I think and that to me makes sense because we've lost quorum at this point. So let's, in the interest of respecting everybody, let's go to that. Angie, what do you think?
Angie had to drop off.
Even that tells me definitely let's go to the I think to wrap this thing up. But in the meantime, we can at least start to pull things that we agreed on collectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I just want to thank folks. We had a very productive meeting. We did get through a good amount of voting, and there was a good amount of consensus as well. And I appreciate the robust discussion. I think it will result in much better legislation.
I completely agree, but I can tell you, as much as people want to share their passion here, it is a reflective of the type of, how do I put it, commitment we have from this group, and I really appreciate it. This is probably one of our best meetings. We saw so many people agreeing, and even though, you know, we all aligned, but having this number of people agreeing is very helpful. So thank you all very much, and really appreciate you all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always good to be appreciated.
Charles, I do appreciate you, my friend.